Welcome to the newest episode of Beyond the Fame with Jason Fraley. I'm your host, Jason Fraley, picking the brains of the top filmmakers, musicians, and artists of our time. Today marks the 10th anniversary of DC radio personality Marc Sterne creating a Hollywood firestorm with his impersonation of Christopher Walken. I spoke with Marc about his memories of the Walken controversy and how he created his British alter ego Nigel on the Tony Kornheiser Show. Marc Sterne, hey, thanks so much for joining us on WTOP.
Jason, it is always great to see you and always great to chat with you, man.
Now, you're one of my all-time favorite people. We used to go on your podcast, your At the Movies podcast back when you used to do that. And of course, I think I've come on, Tony's show, to Kornheiser Show, to do Oscar picks one time with you. Even before we started recording this, we talked an hour about, The Thin Man and the best years of our lives, and we could go all day.
We really could. It's like just sitting down with your best pal and just talking about the things you love. And you and I, it doesn't matter if we haven't talked in a while. We sit down and we pick up like it was just yesterday. And I could talk those movies all day long. I love that stuff.
Absolutely. And well, the reason we had you on today is a really special, hilarious occasion. Today marks the 10th anniversary, 10 years of when you fooled the world, fooled Hollywood with an impersonation you did of Christopher Walken, and it set the world on fire. AP picked it up, Hollywood took note, and it was all a farce. So set it up for me. I mean, what was the bit?
So, 10 years. It's amazing how fast that flies by. It seems like yesterday.
Right.
I was working at Sports Talk 980 or ESPN 980. And I was doing Tony's show and I was doing Kevin Sheehan's show, The Sports Fix. And Kevin and I were talking about bits that we wanted to do. And everybody knew that I'd been doing this Christopher Walken impersonation for a while, which I learned, by the way, from Billy Bush when I was doing the morning show with him, the Bush League morning show on Z104 back over 20 years ago now. Billy used to do the impersonation and I picked it up from him. And it's one of those voices, right? Jason, once you start doing it, you just can't stop at all. And so I would just love it. And we had this idea, what if Christopher Walken, we also wanted to talk about fantasy football. And we're like, well, this is a way we could talk about fantasy football. Christopher Walken will call in and give us his picks for the week, like who you should start and who you should sit. And then he'll talk about like some ridiculous movie that he's making, and it was always like a reboot of Gilligan's Island with Megan Fox's Marianne or something like that. It was always, and he was going to play the professor. It was like always something that was just plausible enough that you'd say, that actually sounds like it might be a real movie. And then he would go straight from that into right. And if you've got Robert Griffin III on your bench, and I'm going back to when Robert Griffin III was playing, like, a moron, you got to start him against the Bears this weekend, Kev. And we had it, that he was a huge Washington football fan, that he had this huge Winnebago and he'd tailgate all the time. So we really built up this character and it was great fun. But we always used to get people calling in being like, how do you know like Christopher Walken? Like,
that's such a big get.
It's a really big get. And he calls in every week and he's just this huge fan. I had no idea. So we had a lot of fun with it. It was great. And that led us to this anniversary, which was the passing of Natalie Wood. God rest her soul. As we talked about old movies, I adore Natalie Wood. She was so special and just such a tremendous talent. So it's the anniversary of her death. And I guess the captain of the boat that they were on was making the rounds. So Kevin comes to me and he says, well, we got to do this on the show. You got to work this into the bit. And I was like, man, I don't know. That's brought into like real stuff that happened. And I don't know. And he's like, come on, just do it. So I said, okay, sure. So when Kevin came to me and he's like, now, Christopher, this is sort of a big time. There's a lot of news about you and Natalie Wood and all of that. And I went into this riff. I literally didn't script it out. I essentially said, and I could do it in the Walken voice if you want. Go
for it.
Right. It was a festive night aboard the ship, and there was lots of sambuca and later shouting. And I went to my forward bunk, and I was reading a Hardy Boys novel, and I went to sleep. And when I woke up, Natalie was gone. And like, that was essentially what we did, And then the next sentence was like, and Adrian Peterson is going to run circles around the Lions. It was that quick of a transition. Now, I thought, I don't have the best Christopher Walken impersonation, but I thought people kind of clued in that this is being silly. It can't be real. Joe White, the late Joe White, the late great Joe White, who worked with AP, heard it live, and I guess thought it was actually Christopher Walken. And he calls up to the headquarters at AP and he says, "I've got the story." And he's, "What are you talking about?" Christopher Walken has never talked about this ever, and I've got him talking about it on the air. And they're like, "Are you kidding me?" And he's like, "No." So, and I guess he had taped it, so he had the transcription of it. And I guess the way AP does things, they grade everything. If it's if it's colored red, it's the biggest story. Like everything else is nothing. And apparently, it was like somebody had thrown a bucket of red paint all over AP. They're like, this took over everything. It was the day that Ashton Kutcher and Demi Moore split up. So that was the big story, and they should actually be thanking me because I knocked them off the front page with the Christopher Walken. I did. I did. And so we do the bit, and and then we finished out the show, and I left the show, and nobody said anything to us. And I got to the gym maybe like an hour after that, and my phone rings, and it's from somebody. It's not Access Hollywood, but it's one of those type of shows like Dateline or something like that. They're like, "Mr. Sterne." Yeah, I'm like, "Yeah." Like, "Oh, thank God we caught you. Do you have the audio of Mr. Walken coming on your show earlier?" I was like, what are you talking about?"
That was me.
she's like, where we talked about Natalie Wood, and he's never coming, and we're just trying to get this audio so we can have it on the show. I was like, "Oh, you're going to be so upset in about 3 seconds." She's like, "Why?" "Right, because it's me, sweetheart. It was never."
I'm about to do a bench press.
All right. "Ask me how much you think I can bench press, lady."
At the gym.
Right. So she's like, "You're kidding me." She's like, "This was like a prank." I was like, "No, it's not a prank. It was a bit that we did." And then it started to snowball, and people were like, "Oh, the radio station, these guys were just trying to pull one over on everybody." And like, no. This is a bit that we've been doing forever. You guys are just like, I love Joe, but I was like, "Joe, why didn't you call us up and ask us, like, was that really Chris Walken?" And then I heard that Christopher Walken retained an attorney. And then that's when I started getting nervous because I was like, "Oh man, I love you, Chris Walken. You can't, don't sue me. This is all just in good fun, man. Come on."
He actually was seeking legal action against you, potentially.
Potentially, yeah. And I was terrified because then they're afraid, Jason, at that point, you're just going to get a knock on the door. And he's like, "Right, you had fun with your little giggle fest there. And now you've got to deal with the face on the other side of that voice, sunshine." And I was terrified that there was going to be something like that. But no, it all went away. I did call up Billy because, again, I'd gotten the impersonation from him. I sort of riffed it off of him.
Billy Bush.
Yeah, I'm sorry. He had me on Access Hollywood Live, I guess, with him and Kit. And it was not my best performance ever. I'll just say that. But it was pretty wild having laughs about that. And that was my big TV appearance.
Well, that's so wild that he actually lawyered up. And man, you you were this close to having a Pulp Fiction watch shoved up your, you know what, by Mr. Christopher Walken. Oh
yeah,
man.
It was a terrifying reality. Yes.
That is wild. That is wild. So, I mean, and this is the Associated Press too. The fact that you were able to fool them is a huge feather in your cap because, this is, I mean, we got to say, typically the Associated Press is the, bastion of objectivity. This isn't like, a Fox News or MSNBC right or left, bias or whatever. I mean, this is Associated Press, long respected down the center of the line. If it comes out on the wire, everyone runs with it. Is that a real feather in your cap that you're able to fool the unfoolable?
Yes. In a word, yes. Only because, Jason, because occasionally when I would do news updates and I would report something from the AP, and I would get to say, I would allow myself to say that is if they got it right, because occasionally they get things wrong. And I felt like I was totally capable of being able to say that because I was, they got that story wrong. But yeah, it was funny because we didn't intend to fool anybody. We were just out there having laughs. And all of a sudden it became this huge deal. And I felt really bad for Joe, who was, again, a super sweet guy and really great at what he did. And it killed me that he sort of got caught up in this, Joe White. So, but yeah, I fooled the AP.
Did he keep his job? Hopefully
he did. He
Okay.
did. He ended up retiring not long after, like maybe like 5 years ago or something like that, and was running like a convenience store or something like that when he passed. But yeah, that did not cost him his job, thankfully.
Gotcha. And were you able to keep doing? Did it cost you your job? No. Were you able to keep doing the walking impressions on Kevin's show, or did you kind of pull it back after that?
No, we kept going. We kept going strong all the way through until, we all sort of left that station when whatever happened to that station, what happened. But no, we kept going strong with that. I think we probably poked some fun with it. And I think I think he said, would you like to clarify anything from your last week's appearance, Chris? And I think I said, yeah, I want to just make sure I say this very clearly. I was reading a Nancy Drew book and not a Hottie Boys novel when I was up in the berth, and it was like that. And it was like literally, Jason, I had said I was reading a Hardy Boy novel and then I went to sleep after, listening to this. So it's like the fact that they took it seriously and thought that Chris Walken was actually reading a Hardy Boys novel, I was like, that should have been a red flag to everybody.
Well, I love that, the week after show, people think you might be doing a mea culpa for legal reasons, and all you do is change what novel you're reading.
Right. To a Nancy Drew.
Yeah. I love it. Yeah, Hardy Boys to Nancy Drew. Some real heavy stuff there during this tragic event. I mean, and we do have to say it was a very tragic event. That
it was awful.
Catalina Island, November 29th, 1981, the drowning. And I actually interviewed Robert Wagner, who obviously was on the boat with them, and he had a memoir coming out or something, and I kid you not, again, I have no way to prove this, but I kid you not, I do the whole interview, and at the very end I ask him about that tragic night, and it starts to be like, oh, you're breaking up on me, talk to you later. It was bizarre. Yeah. Now, I'm not accusing him of anything, but the timing is crazy.
Yeah, and I'm sure. Listen, this is why Christopher Walken's never talked about it. I'm guessing because it was such a tough memory. They were all so close, and that was just a horrible night. And listen, I never met Natalie Wood, but she was one of those personalities on screen that you felt like you knew her. She was just such a magical person, and it was a horrible day. It was a horrible event, and I loved all three: Robert Wagner, Christopher Walken, Natalie Wood. But I can't do Robert Wagner or Natalie Wood impersonation, so I'm stuck with doing Chris Walken.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And Walken, I mean, we could talk. I mean, the Deer Hunter, he was so amazing in that movie.
Oh my God,
good, so good. Well, now you'll always be forever tied to Christopher Walken, whether you like it or not. Actually, I'm sure you like it. It's this is a crazy thing you were able to pull off there. Well, remind our listeners, a little bit more about you. I mean, this isn't the first time that you've done impersonations. I mean, face it, all the time. Most of the world knows you as a different name as Nigel, a British guy on the Tony Kornheiser Show, not knowing it's American Marc Sterne. How did that actually start? How'd you start doing the Nigel bit on Tony's show?
And you're very kind to say all those things. Thank you so much. I started with Tony, and I think I've been with him maybe a month or two, and we were sort of still feeling each other out in terms of a working relationship. And I don't think I was doing all that well. And then this story came up, and it was a bizarre story. And please, audience members, forgive me for talking about the details of this because it's kind of weird. But it was a story that came out that there was a steel cage match between a lion and like 40 small people. And in the story, like 30 of the small people were eaten out directly, and like another 8 were maimed. It was like a horrible story. And we're like, this is terrible. And we did, we talked about it on the show. And then the next day we found out that was truly a hoax. And it turned out it started in England as a bar bet, like these two guys talking. So then Gary Braun, who was on the show, and I started joking around in an ad break. We'd be like, no, you got to take the lion every time. No, it's a numbers game, man. It's the little people. You got to take them. No. And so Tony starts laughing, goes, all right, everyone stop. Do that when we get on the air. So we came back from commercial. Tony explains, he goes, it started out as a bar bet, and it sounded something like this. And it goes to Gary and I talking, and we have big jokes, and we kill it. And there's a big laugh in the studio. We go to commercial break. Tony takes his headphones off, and he points to me, and he goes, you can only talk like that from now on. I said, okay. Because I'd always done voices. I'd done a lot of acting, in high school and college, and accents have always been, I can't do a lot of things in life, but I can imitate different accents pretty well. And so Tony loved it. and we loved it being the subversive sort of like, who's this Nigel guy? Didn't have a last name. Tony came up with the name. It was an homage to Nigel Tufnell because we all love Spinal Tap. And literally within like a few weeks, I had people like reaching out to me like, did you get fired from Tony's show? I haven't heard you on that show in weeks. And I'm like,
they
no.
replaced you with some guy named Nigel.
No, it's me. It's actually me. And it was people who were close to the show. I was like, how do you not know that's me? So that was, and we've been keeping going strong. I mean, I think, we talk about it now. I mean, the cat's sort of out of the bag. People know that I'm not actually an English guy, but there are a lot of folks out there that listen and they're like, wow, they got an English producer that doesn't seem to know much about English football or anything like that, but he seems to be from England. So, and I'll say this, and I can't prove this, but on the Mike and Mike show, the national sports show that they did, they ended up bringing on an actual English producer named Liam. And I could only feel that was some sort of tribute to the success that Nigel had. That they had to replicate that in some way. So yeah, that was
life imitates art, sir.
Yes. Yeah. So, but that was, and we've been doing the Nigel, like literally, I can't do Tony's show now without slipping into that accent. Like if they said that the character's dead, I'd be like, well, I don't know what to do now because I only talk like that.
You can't kill off Nigel. I mean, that's
No.
a staple. That's Americana. No. Well, so how many years
exactly.
how many years are you at doing Nigel now? When was that first, cage match animal thing?
I want to say like 05, I think. Wow. 04, 05. I mean, it's coming up on, I mean, I know Tony just celebrated the 20th anniversary of PTI. I'm pretty sure that when he and I have done 20 years together, we're not going to get the same sort of fanfare, but it's coming up. It's about 17 years that I've been doing it. Yeah. Wow. So yeah,
that's one of the reasons why we all love the Tony Kornheiser show and the radio or the podcast or even PTI. It's the fact that he had the sensibility to allow you to do that and keep it going. Like it's this inside joke that's now pushing 2 decades.
Yeah, it really is. And he got that I loved being a little subversive with stuff, that kind of humor, and he loves that. And so that was when we really clicked as a working duo. And not that it was bad before then, but it was like, okay, now we're humming and this is just great. So it's been such a treat to get to work with a guy like that. So talented, so kind and generous. Yes, I know he plays a curmudgeon a lot, but he's one of the kindest people I've ever gotten to know. And to get to do that every day and to get to make him laugh and to make our audience members laugh has just been an absolute thrill for me.
Absolutely. And was that when you were in our building? Remember 3WT used to be in TOP's building, or when was that? When did you start with them?
It was before that. It was the old DC 101 building over on Brookville Road off of Georgia Avenue. That's where he started. And it got to be so big when I would fill in for Tony, because Tony was off a lot for Monday Night Football. Sometimes I would fill in for him. I could only do it as Nigel. So I would have to do the whole show, conducting interviews, going to commercial break, like everything as Nigel. And that was pretty strange. So
do you ever find yourself like slipping out of it here and there, and then you're like, oh crap, I got to be Nigel for a second?
For some reason, very rarely. He's caught me a couple times, like literally like once or twice over the 17 years. He's like, hey, you went a little American there. I think we give it a little bit more latitude now because I think we can argue the way to say, well, Nigel's been living here for so long. He's lost a little bit of the accent.
He's assimilated a little bit.
Yes, exactly. But now, because you used to come and do the show with us on occasion when we did the show at Chatter. So we had a live audience there. So when the segment is going, we're live taping, all right, Tony, yeah, this is coming up next. I can't wait for it. All right, yeah, great guns. And then the second we go to commercial, we're like, all right, that was great. All right, we got 5 seconds. You're like, the people in the audience be like, wait a minute, who is that? He's got 2 voices. But I've always had that, and people have asked me, how do you get it straight and I don't know what it is, but when the mics are on for that particular show, I just have something in my brain that says you're Nigel. So make sure you speak with a British accent. So,
well, it's probably like any other actor that's playing a British role. While you're there, you flip the switch, you do it, and then you go home. But do you ever find yourself doing the Nigel voice outside, like in normal life?
All the time. All the time. For some reason, I get a great thrill if I like bump into somebody, like at the Safeway. Safeway is like when Nigel really comes out, because I'll be shopping and I'll be like, oh, what do I want? I want some beans. Oh yeah, beans would be nice. What else do we want for dinner? So I'll just be talking aloud. And then and then I'll run it, like bump into somebody like, oh, sorry about that. Excuse me. And so for some reason, I think it's important for people at Safeway to think that I'm British. I have no idea why. It's really bizarre and kind of stupid, but that's
Not
me.
when you set that up. I thought you were going to say people come up to you. I thought it was strictly going to be when someone approaches you and says, "Aren't you Nigel?" But you just said that you're sitting there talking to yourself in the voice. Do I want beans?
yeah, that's me.
You're talking to yourself in the voice now. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, I know. That's how far it's gone. Yeah, and I'd blame it. I'd blame it on the lockdown and pandemic, but I've been doing this for over a decade, so that's how insane I am.
Exactly. Well, a little insanity goes a long way. That's what I'm talking about. Reminder before we remind our listeners whenever I have someone on a little bit about your own journey. Like where exactly did you grow up?
I grew up in Liverpool. No, I'm kidding.
We're talking to Mark now.
That's right. It's not me. No, I grew up in Boston. I got, I didn't really know what I wanted to do when I got out of school. I kind of kicked around with some jobs, but had done a bunch of acting. And Billy Bush again comes into the story, and he said he was working at a station, said, hey, you would have fun with this. Connected me with somebody up in New Hampshire. I spent the first 3 years of my radio career doing radio in Lake Winnipesaukee, New Hampshire at WLKZ Oldies 105. And, and I would have fun doing voices and characters on that. And then Billy needed a producer. I came down and I worked with him on his morning show for a couple of years, but I always wanted to do sports. And an opening happened, open up at a slot opened up at 980, and I got a job there. And I was with them for an awfully long time, except for those 3 years I was over at TOP, which was such a thrill for me. When Tony and I went over there, because I'm not just saying this because this is on TOP. WTOP is the gold standard for radio, not just in Washington, D.C., but everywhere. And that's the personnel, the programming, everything, management, ownership. It is just the best that I've ever worked with. So it was an absolute thrill for me to be over there. Excuse me. And then Tony, I went back to 980. And then he and his son, Michael, said, you know what, we want to take this thing to a podcast. And so we left, gosh, I want to say 4 or 5 years ago now. And it's been a ball just doing that, because basically it's us working for ourselves. And it's just been a real thrill. And somebody once asked me not that long ago, they said, man, don't you want to do something else? Like, you've been working with Tony forever, and doing this Nigel bit forever. And what I said to him, I said, listen, this is the greatest show I could ever hope to work on, and the greatest guy I could ever hope to work with. And if at the end of my day, when my obituary is being written, if the first line is the longtime producer and sidekick Nigel on the Tony Kornheiser Show, I'm incredibly proud of that. Would I have loved to have won an Oscar? Yes. And I might still win one as a screenwriter with you, Jason. I'm still hoping about that. But this is, yeah, exactly. But, and there's still things that I'm pursuing and doing a lot of fun stuff, but this has been such a joy. And that's sort of, I was just a kid that loved to do voices and loved to sort of perform. That got me into radio. And then my skill set really just matched up with Tony, because he's a guy that loves old music and old movies. And he's like, how do you know all this stuff?
Right.
That's what I watch. It's what I listen to. So it's just been a real great journey,
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, in this medium, it doesn't get any bigger than that. If that is the line in the obituary, longtime producer and sidekick Nigel to Tony Kornheiser Show, you've done it. That's a life well lived. That's as big as it gets in our business.
Yeah, that's what I think.
We all know Mr. Tony, his persona from TV, PTI, and the radio show, and then now the podcast. What's he like? I've only met him maybe once or twice, but working with him day in and day out, what's he like behind the scenes? Dish on the legend himself as a guy, as just a guy.
You know what? Here's what. First of all, he's one of the best guys I know, and I know he would say to this, he would say, "Pshaw, come on, stop." But he really is one of the nicest guys. He's one of the most generous guys that I've ever worked with. And that's in terms of like a generosity of spirit, but also generosity of the microphone. Like, he's always happy to give mic time to people. And some people you work with aren't always like that. And the thing I will always love about Tony is he loves to laugh. He loves to have fun. Like, that's my big takeaway from working with him, and he loves a good joke, but he also doesn't suffer fools. So if you're not funny, he's not just going to give you a blanket laugh. So when you make him laugh, you know you've really hit a home run. And when I close my eyes and think of those great moments on the show, it's just seeing him grin with like the Cheshire Cat grin, and you're like, man, we just did it right there. And hearing him laugh is always one of my great joys in life. So that's what I think of him as a guy that likes to laugh and likes to have jokes and make fun. And, we're serious about what we do, but we also don't take it too seriously, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. It's a good balance of that. Well, you mentioned just a second ago that there'll be times where, you'll mention an old movie or old music and he stops and goes, "How do you know all this?" You're like, "Well, this is what I do in my spare time."
Yeah.
And you and I share that. We're old souls with the watching TCM and stuff. But what sort of, do you have any examples? Like what are his movie touchstones? What does he love? Get really animated when you bring up?
Well, a few more. Godfather 1 and 2. Like when there's so many of us that agree, those are just brilliant movies. And anytime you quote those movies, we're always going back and forth on quotes.
Oh yeah, arguably the greatest combined piece of work, part 1 and part 2. Arguably the greatest.
Yeah. So he loves those. That Thing You Do, the Tom Hanks movie.
Sure.
It's sort of an homage to the Beatles in a lot of ways, or that sort of time period.
Right.
We both love that. Michael Clayton is another movie. He's called that a perfect movie.
It is. It's underrated. Like people forget about it, but it's so darn good.
It is. It's really, really good. And so those off the top of my head, those are the ones he really likes. If I come in and I say to him, "I was watching Nick and Nora Charles last night," I'd be like, "All right, it's a good movie, but what are you doing, man?" So
exactly.
Yeah. And he loves the Beatles movies, loves Help. I think he likes Help more than Hard Day's Night, but he loves, because he's a big Beatles guy.
Gotcha. Wow. Well, you and I could seriously talk all day. Anything else you want to update us on about going forward? I mean, I hope Tony does the show forever, but I know it'll be long after you and we're all gone. I feel like it'll be in good hands with Michael. Is a good dude too, man. Talk about what made him such a an easy fit in there with you all.
Michael is fantastic. He is a really good dude, as you said. He's I've become really, really good friends with him, and it's great having him on the show. Just because behind the scenes, the stuff that he organizes, he's in charge of a lot of like sponsorships and sales opportunities, and he's also in charge of keeping Tony on the rails. Because as much as I love Tony, sometimes he can sort of get in his own way. We're getting upset about something, and Michael's right there to keep him in line. And Michael has first of all, Michael's one of the smartest guys I have ever run into. He's just a really smart, really well-read guy, and a really dry, subtle humor. And he throws out one-liners that sometimes they get lost. If there's all of us in the studio, they get lost in the noise of it. And so when it's been the three of us, he's really stood out a lot more, which I've loved because he's really got a great sense of humor. And I've loved seeing that shine. And it's just, it's great to see a father-son get along the way they do and enjoy doing what they do together as much as they do. And to be sort of a fly on the wall for all of that, again, has just been a real treat.
Yeah, for sure. Following in Dad's footsteps. But you mentioned The Godfather. He never did I never wanted this for you, Michael.
No, never did. Never did. And I never had to help him wheel, his father in a hospital while some people were coming to hit him,
Right.
I think that
amazing
was
when that nurse says, "What are you doing?" I jump every time. Coppola structures that like a Hitchcock suspense or something, man. I guess that makes you Tom Hagen in this relationship here. But
I think so. Yeah, I think it makes me Tom Hagen. I'd rather be Tom than Enzo the Baker, or certainly better than Sonny, because it does not end well for Sonny at the
and at the toll booth. But and then of course in part 2 that you get that foreshadowing where it's Daddy's fighting again.
Yeah, exactly. So, listen, if you're calling me Tom Hagen, I'll take Tom Hagen. He's the one that had to go out and give what was the producer's name? Waltz.
Oh, Waltz.
Yeah. Yeah, he was the one that had to go have that dinner and deliver that message.
And I love a couple scenes later, they bring the bouquet of flowers and they say, "Hey, this is from
Johnny.
Johnny got the part."
Yeah. And what does the Godfather do? Brando's just like, "Yeah, get it out of here." He's like, and Hagen's like, "Of course, I just wanted to see him, boss." Yeah. So, yeah. Hey, I'll take Tom Hagen any day of the week. That is a huge compliment.
It's so good. Well, before we run, we really could talk all day, but why don't you just tell our listeners, where we can find you? Obviously, Tony Kornheiser Show on the podcast, but what you got a bunch of other irons in the fire, right? Another podcast too, right?
I do. I'm working on a couple other podcasts. I'm producing and co-hosting with Adam Ferrara, who's one of the funniest human beings on the planet, also one of the kindest people you ever know.
Hilarious.
In fact, he's got a show coming the DC area, Magooby, soon. And I should have the dates, otherwise I'd plug it. But look up Adam Ferrara, like you want to see him. That's called the Adam Ferrara Podcast. It's out every Thursday, and some brilliant interviews. They just interviewed Brooke Shields, among others, and great stuff there. I also am working with USTA. I've done a lot of work with tennis, with the City Open over the last 10 years, and that's led me to working with the US Open. And now they've said, we want you to do this podcast. It's been going on since May, twice a month. It's called Courtside, the official US Open podcast with Marc Sterne. So hopefully, I just was talking to Jimmy Arias, a former number 5 player in the world, about Jason, some of the craziest stories I have ever heard in professional tennis. This is when he played Davis Cup down in Paraguay. I'll give you one of the highlights. He lost the match, but it was such a crazy atmosphere. Somebody literally threw a brick at his head. Like,
oh my God.
Yeah, you'll have to listen to the interview for the rest of it, but it's terrific. So I have a lot of fun with that. And so yeah, that's keeping me plenty busy.
How do you like my backhand? Well, I bet you can't take this service. A brick.
Yeah, like the fans were so crazy. Yeah, it's ESPN needs to do a 30 for 30 on that. That match alone was just insane.
Wow. Well, plug it again. What's the name of the tennis podcast?
Courtside, the US Open podcast.
All right, look that up right when you get off here, everybody. Well, Marc, thanks so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. Again, it's the 10th anniversary of the infamous Christopher Walken voice impression hoax that you did on 980. But really, this was just an excuse to catch up with you.
I was gonna say that's why the whole why we did this is because of the anniversary. But any excuse to talk to you, Jason. You're one of my favorite people. You know more about movies than I do, and I can't tell you what a huge compliment that is, because I watch everything, and your take on everything is just so great. If I'm going to see a movie, I want to know what you think about it first. And I love talking to you. I hope to come back soon, because there's so much more I want to chat with you about, because I just love catching up with you, man. Oh,
right back at you. You are a wealth of knowledge of music, movies, everything, sports, of course. Yeah, it's always great catching up with you too. Well, I guess you got to say goodbye as Nigel. I mean, that's the only other way to end this, right?
Do you want it as Nigel, or you want it as Walken? Why
don't you do both? What would Nigel? What Nigel catches up with Christopher Walken on the anniversary? Nigel interviews him. Go.
All right. So, Chris, a few years ago, right, you understand a little English whelp. I'm not going to talk to you about this. I came here to talk to Jason Fraley. Wow, he's a fantastic human being. You little cockroach from Manchester, England, or whatever. Well, that's not very nice, is it? All right. Well, I guess I won't talk to you then. We'll throw it back to Jason for the rest of the interview. Thank you, Jason.
That was perfect. Marc Sterne, everybody. Appreciate it, man. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, man.
Thanks so much for joining us on Beyond the Fame with Jason Fraley. Remember to hit the subscribe button and give us a 5-star rating if you like what you hear. We'll see you next time. I wanted to take a second to tell you about an app I really enjoy. Living in the DC area is great, and Podcast DC gathers all of the local shows that I like all in one local app. Health, sports, local news, politics, and so much more. Podcast DC is the new local app with hundreds of DC area podcasts to choose from. I can earn exciting rewards just for listening and share the podcasts I love instantly. Available in the App Store or in Google Play, listen local with Podcast DC.